Alright, so when is a good time to buff your car? I can't really answer that question because I have no idea what products you've used. If you use cheap stuff, if you use expensive stuff, if you actually finish with the right grits you're supposed to, if you got all your 80 scratches out with 180. Basically, in a production shop, a place that you would take your car if you were in a collision or something like that, you know, they'll paint your car, they'll bake it, and then the very next day they'll buff it. Now that's just high production shops. A custom shop will wait longer, giving you a better finish. Now the problem with buffing your car in the next couple of days after it was painted is you could get what's called shrinking. Now the shrinking occurs because maybe you used a cheap primer. You know, let's just say you buff your car all out, it looks really nice, and then all of a sudden a couple weeks later, you know, looking at it close, you can start to see all these sand scratches that weren't there before. Well, that's what the shrinking is. Now, if you would have waited, let's just say a month, and let that thing heat up in the sun, cool down, heat up in the sun, you know, cool down, maybe that shrinking would have happened before you buffed, and now when you're sanding it, you can get that clear to go flat and then buff it out. There's so many different ways to buff or work on a car. It's ridiculous, and it's kind of mind-boggling how everybody's ways are completely different, but the outcome is usually the same. If you're using cheap products, I would say the longer you wait, the better off you're going to be. If you were to wait a month before you buff it, it's going to be harder to buff, but at least you won't have to worry about any kind of shrinking or anything like that. You could even wait longer if you wanted to. The way clear is, it'll dry to the touch, but it never actually completely gets really, really hard for years. Once again, depending on what product you're using. If it's grabbing your fingernails still, it's still soft. So you could wait longer for that better finish, but like I said, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to buff, but you'll have a better product in the end. So now that you have your car all painted, this is basically going to be about if you use the base coat, clear coat. Base coat, clear coat, you guys know, you got the base coat, which is the color, and then you have the clear coat, which is a clear coat that goes over the color. A single stage would be the color and the clear are pretty much, you know, they're mixed together already. You spray it and that's it. When it comes to buffing, the base clear is going to be the best bet. You know, you can make it look really nice. The single stage, you can buff a solid color. I wouldn't recommend buffing a metallic single stage just because you can move around those metallics, you know, when you're buffing, and it might look like crap. I mean, I don't know, I've never buffed a single stage metallic, but I hear it's not good. So basically, what I'm going to show you, we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to go to the whiteboard, and then eventually we'll get to the car. But what I'm trying to do is get all this stuff out of the way that you might have questions about that I might not be able to do while I'm actually showing you. So there are multiple ways to buff. I once worked for 3 different painters as a buffer, and I'm telling you, each of these 3 painters wanted me to buff the car completely different. One guy wanted me to use the DA the whole time, which means use the DA to sand the clear a little bit, then the DA without an interface pad on it to get the nibs out. Another guy wanted me to use a razor blade in a DA, and the other guy wanted nothing but blocks. You can use big, you know, wet blocks. They're nice and flat. You know, they don't flex really. This right here is another block. It's foam. It's really flexible. I like this for hand sanding wet. Works really well. It's what most people use with your traditional sandpaper. You get it at the big box stores, you know. You guys know what I'm talking about. This is the cheapest way right here. It's the most time consuming because you do panel by panel. You always check your work as you go. That is the least expensive and kind of the best way to do it. But it's going to take you forever. Now, the way I like to do it is with the DA, with the interface pad on it. Then when I come across the nib, I can either use the block, a little tiny block is what nibbing block is what they call it, with some traditional sandpaper. You can block that out real quick. You know, dirt nibs or bugs, you know, whatever you got. I'm sure you got a few things in your clear doing it in the garage. As far as buffing goes, what I have is a Makita. Some guys hate Makitas, they like DeWalt's, so they buy the DeWalt's. I got a deal on this. It works fine. Some people just prefer different things. This is variable speed. Little switch on the back right here. So I'll be using this buffer. This is a wool pad. This is a foam pad. These are both cutting pads. The wool pad polishes faster. Then you're going to go to a foam polishing pad, which gets out the swirl marks. Swirl marks is when you're looking at the car and then you could just see all these swirls, the haze across the whole thing. It's only seen in the sunlight. It's just this haze of swirls. You see a lot of them in the black cars. The compounds we're going to use is I have the 3M Perfected rubbing compound. This is really good stuff. This is what you use with the wool pad. That's what you're going to be using with the wool pad. This is what you'll be using to get the swirl marks out. It's the best stuff. The bottle might look different now. This is an old bottle. Alright, so here's your traditional block method with the paper that you're used to, your basic. I'd recommend 15 and then going to 2000 grit sandpaper, blocking by hand. The block that I showed you, remember when you're using the block, put a little bit of soap in the water and you're good to go. With the DA, you can get DA paper that you can use wet, and what I do is I just put water in a squirt bottle and you just spray it on there, a little bit of water, and then you could start DAing with that interface pad. Now I'd recommend going from 12 to 15. The 3M Perfected rubbing compound will actually buff out 1200 grit. So if you're on a budget, you could just go 1200 grit, buff out the 1200 grit, and first you're going to do it with the rubbing compound, and then you're going to use the swirl mark remover. Rubbing compound with the wool pad or that foam white cutting pad. This is the black or gray, whatever you want to call it, foam pad that you're going to use with the swirl mark remover. Alright, so now we're going to talk about orange peel in your clear coat. Everybody's going to have some orange peel at some degree, unless you're really hammering on the clear or you're very skilled. Now, I did kind of a modified look if you were just to look up really close microscopic to the clear surface here. Now, I don't know if you could see that, but kind of in that reflection right there, this whiteboard actually looks like it has some orange peel in it. Little imperfections there. It's kind of what we're talking about here. Even brand new cars have orange peel. You got the orange peel, you have the option of just sanding off just like the tips of just act like I wiped just the tips off, and you still kind of have a little bit of it, you know, and then you can buff. You can buff that, and then you'll just have minimal amount of orange peel on it, which is more of a factory look. Or you can sand it until it's completely flat, and then you can buff it back out, and it'll look show quality. This is a buffed panel. This is an unbuffed panel. Alright, so we'll get some hands-on for you guys in the future. This is the actual car we're going to be doing a little buff spot on. So we'll look forward to that, and see you guys next time. Subscribe if you haven't.